signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Against? The ayes have it. Very good. We have I believe, one item that's up for a public hearing today. And the procedures for those that are here on this particular item is that we will permit those that are wishing to speak in favor of the item to speak first, and then those who wish to speak against the item, they can also speak after those that are in favor, if needed. And then basically what we'll do is we'll repeat that procedure this evening at 7 o'clock. So all those that are here now are invited to be back at 7 o'clock this evening. The only difference this evening is the committee, after the public hearing, will make a recommendation to all of council. The committee will, in terms of either favorable, unfavorable, or just to table or take time on the particular issue. We thank you all for coming down, and we appreciate everyone taking the time. We want to ask, and we value everyone's opinion, and we look forward to hearing from everyone. So with that, at this point, we'd like to do is get a report from the planning department on this first issue, which is, let me read it into the record.
Jeff, you want us?
Oh, yes. We also, what we'll do is, and we'll repeat this as well, we'll ask those that are wishing to testify this afternoon to please stand up and be sworn in from a representative of our law department.
Okay, if you plan on testifying, if you could stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, nothing but the truth? Say I do. Thank you.
Anybody have an agenda? I had one. Okay, very good. The item that's up for a public hearing is an ordinance authorizing conditional use to retain a campground tent community at 15 Broad Street. Mr. Antonucci.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. The petitioner, Sage Lewis, LLC, is requesting permission to retain a campground or tent community at this location. The campground and tent community began operations in the rear of the property in the spring of 2017. Over the course of several months, the campground grew from a handful of tents to 44 tent sites by June of 2018. The tents extend northward to Kent Place and are sandwiched between a house, three-story apartment building, and a commercial building. Proposed use has resulted in complaints from neighboring property owners concerning excessive noise, offensive smell, theft from neighboring properties, illegal drug activity, animals behaving aggressively toward neighbors, and increased trash and debris on the site and on neighboring property. Annunciation Terrace at 25 Broad Street is adjacent to the property. While not visible from the street, the campground and tent community is highly visible to the eastern half of this three-story apartment building. The management company has complained of negative economic impact due to the current use of the neighboring property as a campground. They're experiencing difficulty renting apartments due to the abutting land use. Many of the residents of Annunciation Terrace have stated that they do not feel safe and are not able to enjoy the outdoor amenities of their property because of the presence of the campground and tent community, and you have a petition from the residents of Annunciation Terrace in front of you. Inspections by the Akron Fire Department revealed that the campground and tent community is dense and overpopulated, with 44 tents packed into a small area. The Akron Fire Department inspection revealed safety concerns regarding the gate location and tents resting upon highly flammable wooden pallets. Between June 2017 and June 2018, the police department has taken 132 telephone calls regarding the location. The presence of the campground and tent community in this residentially zoned area is not harmonious with the Land Use and Development Guide Plan objective of eliminating present and future conflicts of land use which are detrimental to residential neighborhoods. Furthermore, the use does not meet several of the general standards applicable to all conditional uses included in Section 153.474 of the Akron Municipal Code of Ordinances. First, the proposed use must be harmonious with and in accordance with the general objectives of the city's comprehensive plan. One stated goal of the city's comprehensive plan or Land Use and Development Guide Plan is to preserve and protect single-family residential neighborhoods. Allowing a campground adjacent to single-family home is not harmonious with the goal of protecting single-family uses Another goal of the plan is to improve the quality of housing of all residential areas. Tents are not a safe or healthy form of long-term housing. Furthermore, the proposed use must be designed, constructed, operated, and maintained so as to be harmonious and appropriate in appearance with the existing or intended character of the general vicinity, and not change the essential character of the same area. Dozens of outdoor tents assembled in a campground or tent community configuration in a rear yard in a residentially zoned area adjacent to a single-family home and an apartment building which has a bird's eye view of the tents and other personal property on the lawn is not harmonious or appropriate in appearance with the existing or intended character of this residential neighborhood. Third, the proposed use must not be hazardous or disturbing to existing or future neighboring uses. The current use of the property has resulted in numerous complaints from neighboring properties regarding offensive conditions, as set forth above, which indicate that the proposed use is currently and would continue to be hazardous and are disturbing to existing or future neighboring uses. Fourth, the proposed use must not create excessive additional requirements at public cost for public facilities and services and not be detrimental to the economic welfare of the community. The property is currently used and proposed to be used presents a risk of harm to the economic welfare of the community due to the offensive conditions. Neighboring property owners have complained of detrimental economic effects directly related to the proposed land use, which are at risk of recurring at existing and future businesses and residences such as Middlebury Commons throughout the vicinity. Finally, the proposed use must not involve uses, activities, processes, materials, equipment, and conditions of operation that will be detrimental to any person or property or the general welfare by reason of excessive production of traffic, noise, smoke, fumes, glare, or odors. The campground and tent community has had a negative impact upon the abutting Annunciation Terrace apartment building and single-family home, which residents have complained of excessive traffic, noise, and odors. Regardless of occupancy, a campground use is not compatible with the surrounding uses of this location or the character of the neighborhood. Additionally, a campground and tent community is an inappropriate land use within this or any similar residentially zoned area, adjacent or near residences within the city. Allowing a campground and tent community at this location would risk irreversible damage to the economic welfare and quality of life of the neighboring properties. As such, both Planning Commission and planning staff recommend disapproval.
Thank you, Mr. Segedy.
And Chairman Fusco, members of the Planning Committee, I just wanted to add a few things for the record. Just a reminder that the issue before Council today regarding the tent city is not about whether the homeless should be helped. The issue is about whether this particular residential location is an appropriate place in which to have tents. When reviewing a request for conditional use, we must look at the surrounding land use and determine whether it is harmonious with or disturbing to surrounding uses. As you heard from Mr. Antonucci, there are 8 factors in the zoning code which we look at to determine that. We believe in helping the homeless in the city of Akron. We believe in providing healthy and safe housing for the homeless. But we also take our responsibilities very seriously to examine what's best for the common good in our neighborhoods.
Thank you, Mr. Segedy. Very good. At this time, we'll open up for a public hearing. And if there's anyone here wishing to speak in favor of the conditional use requests at 15 Broad Street, please feel free to come forward and provide your name and address.
Good afternoon. My name is Sage Lewis, and I represent 15 Broad Street here in Akron. I think there's one message I want to relay here, is that we want to work with you. This isn't something like we demand 44 tents. We don't demand anything other than the right to help the most needy in our community in some way, shape, or form, and provide us hands. So we aren't here to say we permanently want a campground. We aren't here to say we want 44 tents. All we're trying to do here is to figure out a dialogue.
Hey, Sage, press your button there on the microphone.
Oh.
That way,
I can be louder now?
yeah, you can.
Perfect.
Go ahead.
That's a relief. So, yes, so I don't know how we dialogue. I know that many of you come to our facility, and I am so honored We have sent so far, some of our supporters have this week so far sent over 370 emails, and some of you in this room have responded back to them, and I'm grateful, and they're grateful for that. They send them to me and say, hey, look, Councilman Fusco sent me an email, and I appreciate that. And so that's what I want. I don't know how we sit here. You are here, and I am here, and we have this, and now this, and one of the gentlemen in the middle said, this isn't about caring for the homeless, this is about zoning, and we must stay in the lane of zoning in this meeting. And I would imagine in Montgomery, Alabama, in the mid-1950s, they said the same thing about the bus. It's not about whether we want to have equal rights for the African Americans of America. This is about busing. And so when do we eventually say, this is a larger issue that we need to deal with? These people aren't going to magically go home. It's not like they're glamping in my backyard. They're going into winter now. And what is going to happen is they aren't going to go back to their parents, which are dead or have disowned them. They aren't going to go to their friends who are equally in as bad straits. They're going to go to tents in worse conditions. They are going to spread out across your city in tents. We have a 20-person waiting list right now for people to get in tents. This is not pretend. I watched a stream that Doug Livingston did when the COC was here, and they mentioned that homelessness was increasing in Barberton. But yet somehow I am the reason homelessness increased 70% in Akron. There are 150 tents on the river in Cleveland. There is a huge thing happening in Cincinnati where they have now outlawed tents across the entire county. We are in an epidemic here that has been caused by the federal government since the 1980s on both sides of the aisle. Whether you decide to do something today or you decide to do something tomorrow or next month or next year, this is not going away. And we, in fact, are in a good economy. When the inevitable downturn happens, or when our president and the current administration decides to make the housing go from $50 a month to $150 a month, what is going to happen? More tents. More tents. And if we are not allowed to help them, they are just going to be under your bridges, on your sidewalks as they are in California. This is not going away. This is as good as it gets right now. This is as good as it gets. Please let us work together. Please let us come up with some solution, any solution, anything. You want time limits, you want size, you want anything. But don't just give us an up or down vote that this is your lane of zoning and this is not according to zoning. This is huge. This is America. This is homelessness in America, and we have the opportunity to lead America. We have an opportunity to show America what Akron is and how Akron represents the poor and the needy, and we have a great opportunity here. Please let's not waste it. Please let's do the right thing together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. I'd like to ask if there's anyone else here wishing to speak in favor.
Becky Sremak. I reside at 3433 East Tuscaroras Avenue in Barberton, 44203, and I'm one of the attorneys who represents the homeless charity and village. I'm here today to tell you that you can vote yes, that the law allows this, and that we have fulfilled every requirement of the conditional use application process. Second, Homeless Charity and Village clearly fulfills the substance of the comprehensive plan of Akron. The fact that there may not be a category it clearly fits into, to have a tent city, only speaks to the fact that there is a gap here. There is a gap in the services provided to the homeless before they can get into shelters, before they can get into permanent housing. We know of no hazardous, no disturbing use of the property at 15 Broad. In fact, we believe that many of the concerns that have been relayed to you through this process are ones that relate to the early days of 15 Broad Street, while it was just beginning. Before, there had been extensive renovations to the building, allowing for restroom facilities. Before, there were strict rules in place that provide that anyone using drugs must leave, must sober up, must get into treatment, cannot be at 15 Broad using them. We believe that this village is served adequately by the fire, by the EMS, by all of the services that the comprehensive plan speaks of. Indeed, if these individuals were out in the woods, out in the streets, sleeping in doorways, sleeping on stoops, they would need just the same number of services, if not more. 15 Broad makes those available to people at one convenient location, and it has helped many, many people. We have seen no evidence, none has been provided to us, of the spoken of irreversible damage to the economic welfare of Middlebury neighborhood. In fact, many residents of Middlebury are very pleased with 15 Broad. Many use the food pantry there. Many stop in for assistance to use the laundry facilities. We beg of you to please consider the conditional use application we provided to you. Consider each facet and show how we have shown that 15 Broad does fit in with the city's comprehensive plan and the factors in the conditional use permit. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else here wishing to speak in favor?
Good afternoon. My name is Jeff Rose. I'm a senior attorney with the Institute for Justice. It's a nonprofit public interest law firm that is based in Arlington, Virginia, in metropolitan Washington, D.C. I represent Sage Lewis and the homeless charity. The issue before the committee and before the City Council is not just a question of zoning policy. It also has constitutional implications. People have used their land to shelter the neediest members of society since ancient times. This is a legitimate and repeatedly vindicated use of private property. Ohio's Constitution has among the very best protections for private property in the United States, and the courts of Ohio enforce them. If there were an existing alternative to 15 Broad Street, or if there were at least a hypothetical and realistic alternative, then Sage wouldn't have 44 people living in tents, and he wouldn't have a waiting list. They don't exist. Whatever public interests the city is advancing by saying no to the conditional use permit, and that can be a permit with reasonable qualifications. They can be both technical as applied to what they're doing, and can be restricted in time so that this can be revisited in 6 months or a year. Whatever interest the city has in saying no, those interests are dwarfed by the harms that will be inflicted. These aren't abstract interests in things like aesthetics. These are concrete, life-threatening interests of the homeless people who will be cast once again into the streets. So I strongly encourage the City Council and the committee to do the right thing and work with and not against Sage. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else here wishing to speak in favor?
Good afternoon. I'm Deborah Monaco. I'm at 622 Viewpoint Avenue in Cuyahoga Falls. And I would like to say at the outset that I love Akron. When I finished my education, I chose to come to Akron even though I didn't have family here. And my love of Akron hasn't changed. At one point in time, I located one of my businesses in Sage's building, got to know him better, and have seen the evolution of this organic desire to help the very immediate people in his neighborhood that have come forward for help. When he started a charity and formed a board, I readily agreed and now serve as president of that board. I would say what I bring to the picture today is the request to think about the bigger context of what's happening at this very moment, even today, as you make the decision how to proceed with this. There are kind of three interesting variables. One is the education that we have received about how to help these homeless individuals. The description, I agree that you heard at the beginning about the complaints is dated by very many months. And what's happening there now is a controlled situation where we're meeting people the way they come to us and figuring out how to help them help themselves. And if you haven't yet been to the building, I strongly encourage it. I would never have believed what's occurring there if I hadn't been there myself, to see the ways that they are helping each other up out of their circumstances and the community that they have built, and what's that done for the individuals who are residing in the tents. The second variable at play here is what's happening in the larger community and the support that we're receiving for the work that we are doing. I'd point out these are private individuals doing work on private land with their own money, and I can't imagine a more beautiful Akron than where that continues to occur, whether it's picking up litter or cleaning up a river or coming out for a festival. It's all the community doing what's best in its own best interest with its own resources, not asking the government for anything but the right to continue to do it. And most recently, as we've been evolving past tents and talking about how to get homeless indoors, we have private donors coming forward with money to help facilitate things like the purchase of houses. Very exciting. And the third variable at play here is that we have recently engaged in conversation with the planning department about what would be necessary to enable us to continue the work that we are doing, but with the parameters that, and time limits and whatnot that have been discussed. We are actually currently putting together a document with a written proposal for how to transition homeless indoors, with the promise that for every person moved indoors, we'll take down a tent. And as quickly as we can make this happen, for example, we're going to be setting forth a conditional use permit for 85 Kent Place. It's a house that the homeless charity recently acquired, and we'd like to be able to put more than 5 unrelated people in there. So there are movements underway that I believe has been detailed in a 1,000-page packet that's been submitted to every member of council, which most recently includes a document called Phase 2 of the Homeless Charity. So this is all very much underway.
We got Thursday.
Besides voting yes today on the conditional use permit, you also have the option of just choosing not to vote. Let us finish the document. Delay your vote. Let us finish the document. Let's reach the terms with the planning department that they would find acceptable, that we would find acceptable, given all the education that we've learned about how to help this population, and continue to use our private resources to make that happen. So just vote yes. And if you don't want to do that, just choose not to vote today and give us a little bit more time to work this out. We've promised to get that document to the planning department by Friday.
Thank you. Thank you. Is there anyone else here wishing to speak in favor of the conditional use request at 15 Broad Street? Anyone else wishing to speak in favor? Sir, if you could please provide for the committee your name and address. He's not, okay. Anyone else? Okay, very good. Anyone here wishing to speak against the conditional use request at 15 Broad Street?
Hi, I'm Keith Stahl. My address is 640 Wolf Ledges, and I represent the Continuum of Care, which is an organization that works towards housing individuals that are homeless. And you know, we are very, very committed to serving all individuals that are homeless and to getting them into housing. We absolutely believe that housing is a fundamental human right. And you know, our issue with Tent City is just that. It is keeping people in tents and not moving them towards housing. You know, there are many things I do agree with Sage on, but you know, this fundamental issue is at the core of our disagreement. We have worked with Sage over a number of months to try and lay out a plan where we could move towards you know, eliminating tents and going towards a different type of setting where housing would be the key piece of it. You know, Sage is kind of stuck to the tents as a key piece of what he wants to do. I can also tell you that, reading a lot of research about homelessness across the country, you look at, a place like Seattle, they have increased their tent cities. There's 3 large tent cities, and when they brought in a consultant, national consultant, to help them lay out a plan on what to do going forward, the first thing they said was to quit creating tent cities. All it's doing is increasing your homeless numbers and is not addressing the issue. You are maintaining people in homelessness. Permanent housing does work, permanent supportive housing. We've developed a number of permanent supportive housing projects over the last 6 years. We have reached functional zero for veteran homelessness. That doesn't mean that there isn't a homeless veteran out there, but that does mean that there's a resource available for that veteran and that there's a plan in place. We are working towards functional zero for chronic homelessness. We are well on our way to that. There was a meeting today, as a matter of fact, regarding that. It's a by name list. So we literally are tracking each individual that is chronically homeless in Summit County by name and developing a resource and a plan to get that individual housed. At the end of the day, for us, this is all about the tents. We do not believe it is okay for people to continue living in tents. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else here wishing to speak against the conditional use request at 15 Broad Street? Anyone else here wishing to speak against? Okay, very good. We'll close the public hearing portion and now open it up to any committee members at this time that have questions or comments. Ms. Mobian.
I have been truly torn by the situation that's been presented before us, and I did take the opportunity to visit the tent city, and thanks to Mr. Lewis, he gave me a pretty comprehensive tour, and I certainly appreciated the time that he spent doing that. I certainly want to acknowledge all of the emails that were received, and I did read each and every one of them. It's probably over 100 and some. I don't know how many. I didn't respond, but I did speak with the president, and she indicated that we will send a blanket thank you to all of the individuals who sent us emails. Let me just share with you that I have spent the better part of my 40-some years of working in social services is working with the most in need individuals in our county due to mental illness, substance abuse, you name it. And I also have worked with the homeless population, the continuum of care, and all of those resources. Sage, I can tell you that I appreciate your passion, and I thank you for using your private, financial, and other resources to address this issue. But I tell you that we do have in this community a fairly comprehensive way of trying to address this issue. I served on the continuum of care when I was over the residential facilities some years ago. And they have invited you to be a part of that, that committee, that group. And I can tell you that I've done the night where we do the count, the point-in-time count for homeless individuals on a freezing cold night in January. So I do understand and appreciate where you're coming from. And as Mr. Stahl indicated, the work that we do in Summit County does not mean that there aren't still homeless folks out there. But we do have a pretty comprehensive way of trying to address those issues. I think what I really like about what you have done, the community that you've created there, and I can't tell you that we have residential facilities where people that are homeless operate them on their own. In every residential facility that I'm aware of, there are rules. And I realize we're not here to talk about whether or not the homeless should be housed or not. but I see it all in one package personally. But here's the concern that I have, and I told you this when I visited your facility, that I like what you are doing. I like what you've offered the people. I like the fact that people are self-directed, can come there and get all kinds of resources and services. And I believe that portion of your organization is not being addressed or touched at all. It's just the tents in back of the building that we're saying is not appropriate for in-city occupancy. And I know that's not in compliance with our rules. And I just don't see how you would address those individuals in the winter months, because that's what we're trying to avoid, folks living in inhabitable conditions, conditions that are not, for the human beings. So while I appreciate everything you've created, if I had to vote, and I don't know if we're going to vote tonight or not, I will vote in support of the planning staff's recommendation. What I will tell you, and as the young lady came forth, indicated that they are expanding options, we certainly appreciate that, and please continue, because we need to have every option available to folks that are on hard times. And I know most of us are probably a paycheck or two away from being homeless ourselves, and I don't think anybody around this council is heartless. And for years, we have supported through federal dollars and grants and other means to support the continuum of care. And we do a lot, and I think Mrs. Tolman can share with you all the resources that have been spent to provide some assistance in providing shelter to homeless individuals and otherwise. So I think we are doing a lot of things in Akron, but certainly I don't oppose coming up with some additional options for folks that are safe and habitable and all of that. What I understand from the folks that presented to us from the continuum of care is that they are trying to work with you to help these individuals that you have housed find places to live with the, with the four walls and all of that. So I would hope that you would work with them, because based on what I've heard from them, whether they can house every single individual, I don't know. But it sounds like there could possibly be a place for most of them to go. And again, I don't know if you're going to find any place where you have a group of people that are not related without rules. But I'm sure that there are ways to create somewhat of a community where people feel like they are part of a family. I know that we try to create that in group homes, the proprietary homes that we operate throughout, that we don't operate, private individuals operate throughout the county. So for that, I just want you to know where I stand. I really appreciate the passion, and I think all the emails that people have sent, they have been respectful, and they have pretty much said the things that we all say. We all have compassion for the homeless and those that are most in need. And as I indicated, I've spent the better of 40 years in social services serving this population. So I want you to know that we would like for you to continue to work with the continuum of care. No one wants to round up a group of law enforcement individuals to take down tents. We're hoping that there'll be some easy transition to help these individuals find a place, because I think for most of them there will be a place. And I can think of every shelter in town that's part of the continuum of care that I have worked with over the years, even Haven of Rest. And they have been a safety net for those individuals that we've not been able to treat well, and they've turned lives around. So for different individuals, it takes different kinds of things to help them. So by all means, please continue to expand the options, continue to work with continuum of care, and please, please, please help these individuals find a place. Because I don't know what the next step would be if we find that you're not in compliance. I'm sure it won't be to pull folks out of tents, but I don't know how we get to that point, and I hope we don't have to get to that point. Because I do believe that if you work with the individuals of the continuum of care, they will help you find some safe place for people. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other committee members? Hearing none, any council representatives? Oh, Mr. Neal?
Thanks, Mr. Fusco. I'd like to learn more about the dialogue between the folks with the charity and our planning department. I think we've already gone through a winter with people living there. You know, there are a lot of different dynamics that are just changing in the world we live in. And basically ordinances and laws are put in place because of those changes and those different dynamics. Policies are put in place so that we can protect or develop the type of culture that we want. I mean, we've talked about the Airbnb and how different economies are forcing us to change our laws. My challenge with this is, I don't know how many of these people come from the area that was down there by Wesley Temple, but that community existed there forever and a day, for as long as I could remember. Folks knew that that community was there. Different agencies and facilities took resources to that community until there was some economic development scheduled for there, and then we displaced them. I don't know if most of them ended up at Tent City or where they went. I think the reality is that whatever decision we make today, be it I keep hearing work that we want Sage Lewis to work with the city. I like to think that we just all work together, because this problem isn't going to go away. Like I said, it existed before, and everybody knew it existed, and we kind of just kept quiet until some development came to that area. And then they were displaced, and we had all the different agencies that provided services at that time as well. I think the reality is that no one agency has the silver bullet, because if they did, we wouldn't have the problem. You know, I can relate to this kind of personally. I had some extended family members that lived in the apartment complex or development that was right where we built the new baseball stadium. And when they tore that down, they provided them housing, but they could not restore the community. They could not provide the home. Those people have come down here and told us, don't call them homeless, call them houseless. So now we're going to destroy their home and give them a house. And if you know about anybody that's in recovery, they will tell you, that's why we have all these different group homes across the city. They will tell you the most important thing is that support system, that support group. Now, none of us can relate to this, but that is a support group for those folks. I don't think anybody chooses to want to live in a tent, but there is something missing in these traditional institutionalized ways of providing housing that is not being given to folks who live in Tent City. Is it the perfect solution? No, we know it's not. But I hope we have matured to the point where we understand that, yeah, I mean, we can say it's by a law, and we can find exceptions to those all the time. This is a unique situation, and one that we have to work with. Because what I'd hate, again, knowing people that are in recovery, if we force somebody out, just one person that's supported by that sense of community there, we don't know how we're going to push them over the edge. You know, will they fall back into substance abuse? Will they, you know, what will they fall into? It's obvious that this is serving some type of, providing some type of service. I didn't know there was a list for 20 more people to get in there. And again, folks, I just say, we didn't call it, well, we knew it was a tent city. It wasn't structured like this, had no kind of structure, but it existed, and I don't know how long it existed, right down there past Wesley Temple. And everybody just knew it was the best thing. We kind of just left it alone. The hospitals and different care folks took resources to those folks, until there was some economic interest there, and they had to move. So, you know, I would hope that we take time. I'd like to see the 1,000-page suggestion. I'd like to hear how we're working, how as a collective we're working together before we make a decision. We've made it, there's no question about if they'll make it through a winter. They've already made it through a winter. And before they were at Tent City, they made it through winters scattered throughout the city. But I don't want us to take the easy way out as a council. I want us to do our due diligence and make sure that whatever decision we make, we know exactly what the alternative measures or the improvements are going to be. And I think the best way we do that is at some point in time, this group works with those folks who are directly impacted. They've come down here before. I appreciate Mr. Lewis, but the folks who would be displaced or supported, that we have a chance to work with them. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Swirsky.
Well, just originally Mr. Neal asked a question, which I would also like to hear Mr. Segedy.
Mr. Swirsky, pull the,
efforts to.
Rich, pull the mic closer to you, thank you.
I would like to hear about efforts for, at dialogue and finding common ground. It seems a little like we wish we had done this a lot sooner, and I hope that Mr. Lewis initiated that since he was the advocate for this project. I wish he had done that a lot earlier, but let's hear what's happening today.
Yes, Mr. Swirsky, Council, I can address that. So as Ms. Monaco testified earlier, we've had some discussions about, independent of this conditional use that's before you, about housing in more permanent, safe conditions the residents of the tent city. So as you're all aware, and as Mr. Antonucci read in earlier, our disapproval of this conditional use is based on tents, having people live in tents as opposed to safe, indoor housing. And so our discussions have revolved around that. How would one go about getting the residents of the tent city into permanent, semi-permanent, whatever the case is, housing that's indoors? And so, as you're all aware also, there is the continuum of care name implies, there is a continuum of housing options for the formerly homeless in the city of Akron, whether that's emergency shelters, longer-term shelters, group homes, permanent supportive housing that help people wherever they are on the spectrum of homelessness. And so just about a year ago, as you're also aware, under construction and completed, Stony Point Phase 1, Stony Point Phase 2 is coming on its heels. Is that the answer? It's not the answer. I think, as Mr. Lewis and others have testified, yes, we could all as a community do more to help the homeless, but there are services available in the community. Last year there were close to $7 million spent on homelessness in the city of Akron. More should be done. We believe more should be done. But again, and as was testified to, the issue is trying to help those people get indoors, and we do think there are ways to do that. So to your question, Mr. Neal and Mr. Swirsky, we have had some discussions about what would that look like? Where could those folks be housed? Mr. Stahl also testified that Continuum of Care has also been working on and thinking about that. And if the house that was mentioned, for example, that was involved in the lawsuit, there are former Tent City residents living in that, there would be an option to do a conditional use to get more than 5 unrelated people into that house. That's just one example, but there are ways we believe in working with the homeless charity to get these people into more permanent, safer housing. So that's what the gist of those discussions have been.
That sounds really good and reassuring, and I appreciate that the city is taking some leadership on trying to find some common ground. And you mentioned, one final, you mentioned that there's $7 million spent. Could you talk a little bit about, we got this memo here of the Continuum of Care. I don't know, it would be either you or Mr. Stahl. What services, because I did get a lot of emails, and a lot of people feel like nothing else is being done. It's sort of Tent City or nothing. And Mr. Stahl, if you could
Well, if I could, we are going to, on the continuum of care legislation that is coming in this afternoon, so if we can take that time at that time to talk about that, because we do need to kind of stick in on the exact zoning, but thank you for bringing that up. But we will be discussing that in particular item. Thank you. Mr. Kilby, or no, I'm sorry, samples first and then Mr. Kilby. And again, I'd just like to remind everyone to please stick to the issue at hand.
Thank you. I got a whole bunch of questions, so bear with me. I first want to say that I'm very supportive of the conditional use requests that Mr. Lewis has put forth. I've been very supportive of their community. I've been there several times to visit. Whenever I host an event, any extras we have left over, we take to 15 Broad Street. My daughter is a manager at Panera. They take everything to 15 Broad Street at the end of the day. I think the narrative that we've now formed in the community as it relates to this tent city, and I've read over 200 emails. Some of them are very hard to read and quite frankly a little upsetting. We look like it's the city versus the homeless right now. Not the zoning. No one's talking about the zoning in the community. It looks like the city does not support the homeless, and that troubles me because I know that that's not true, and I think we need to fix that narrative because that's how people are feeling. I know we have, the East End project down there. We have the Middlebury footprint going on. We've got a new fire station being built. We've got the Andecy development. All of that surrounds 15 Broad Street, so it's making it very hard for people not to believe this is why we're pushing them out. So my question is, and it doesn't have to be answered right here, right now, but I would like to know what is our plan as a city? Besides stating that this is a zoning issue, I want to know what plan are we going to put forth to help the homeless? We're tearing down houses like crazy in this city, but yet we have people living in tents. So we need to figure out what we're doing. We're talking about we've got $7 million that was sent to help the homeless, like Mr. Swartzky said, but how much is that actually paying for salaries and administrative costs versus actually helping people get into housing? So I have a lot of questions. I'm sure my colleagues have a lot of questions. This is something that's been brewing for some time. And I just hope we take our time and not rush a decision so we can do something concrete to actually help people. Winter is 3 months away. So if we're putting them out now, where are they going to go when it's 10 below zero? They're going to be back underneath the bridge. They can't go to the Freedom Trail anymore. They were put out there. Some live over by Victim Assistance on Furnace Street in the woods. So now we can't even track them. We don't even know where they're living. And some of them have serious mental health issues. Some of them have PTSD. And I know we keep talking about services that are offered to them, but many of them don't even qualify to go into the Haven Arrest because maybe they had something in their background. Some of them have service dogs. They can't take those into the Haven Arrest with them. Some of them go through InfoLine, but again, it's challenging for a lot of them. So what are we actually doing to help them through the process? Sage is just one person trying to do a lot of things, and I commend him for that. But when we have 44 people already living there and over 20 people waiting on a list to go live in a tent, not a house, we have a problem. And I just hope that we really sit and think about what we're doing here and do it the right way so we're actually truly helping people and not just making this about zoning. None of these buildings that I mentioned will be done by March 2019. So I think we've got some time to wait and do this the right way so they're not somewhere freezing and they have nowhere to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kilby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I want to also say that I...
Mr. Kilby, turn on your microphone, please.
It's on, but I'll
Okay.
talk louder. But
Thank you.
First, I want to say I support Tent City, I've been down there numerous times, and, you know, we've had a very good discussion here today on this issue, and I also would like the committee to take some time on this and not rush this through.
I don't think there's an appetite here to rush this through
Yeah,
tonight.
okay, well, I
kind of
sense
hearing
that
that
too.
loud and clear.
Anyways, let me say this. Yeah, my observation, like I said, I've been down there numerous times, and this is a community, and I think the option, we're going to get them into housing. I don't think they necessarily want a house. They want, this is kind of like a commune in a way, a well-run commune. And there's a sense of community. It's almost like a family that's doing good, helping one another. So I think that's what Second Chance Village is. I understand that tents are not the ideal place for people to live, and there should be a roof over their head, not just a tent. But that takes time, and Sage has put something together that I think is really good, and it's evolved into something that I really support. Some of the complaints, I agree with, I think one of the ladies said that most of those complaints were probably from a year and a half ago or a year ago. I see it as a very well-run place. The daycare, or whatever you want to call the services that are in the basement of that building, are fantastic. I mean, these are people that not only are they homeless, they've reached the bottom of the barrel. You know, like for instance, what if you don't have a birth certificate and you can't vote? And say you were born in West Virginia at your home. How do you get that? Well, these people down there have the resources to help people do things like that, and that's what they're doing. So I think it would be a real shame to end this. I think the planning department and the city should be really working, and the social workers, and you know, I think they do a really good job too, but I don't think they're addressing this particular problem. Let me ask a question here to the administration. Okay, I understand the tents is a problem, but let's say they raise the money, and I don't know if they want to do this, just as like the building upstairs, and make that into a dormitory or something along those lines. Would the city entertain giving them conditional zoning to do that if they did away with the tents?
I could probably answer that, Mr. Segedy. Just that that's somewhat of a hypothetical, and I understand the question, but the thing of it is probably like that issue, like all issues, it would be analyzed from every department in the city. That would be passed out to every department. They would then, you know, do a deep dive in terms of, you know, finding out, you know, what their personal, what each department recommendation would be, and then try to work through those. Correct, Mr. Segedy?
Mr. Kobe, are you referring to the 15 Broad building itself, the red brick? So that building is zoned retail. That building, retail zoning allows residential. That building doesn't even need a zoning change to have people living in it. What it would need, and we've discussed a little bit of this with Mr. Lewis, would be, you know, it would have some building code and housing code issues in order to enable the folks to move inside and to do it to meet building code, but it wouldn't even be a conditional use. So that is an example of a real possibility. It wouldn't be free, you know, it would take work on Mr. Lewis's part to retrofit that building, but that is something that could be done, and to be quite honest, that's something that we've encouraged. So I think that is possible.
Good. So that's just one option. And what about, you know, there was some talk about these little houses, and there's some areas close by to 15 Broad Street that could be utilized for that, and I understand there's some places on Broad Street, Kent Street, and there's hardly anybody living down there. It's not a, I think it's old industrial land. Now, there was a fella, I read something in the newspaper, and I think he called me a while back. I can't remember his name. He wanted to do something along those lines, but, you know, it fell through. What's our position on the so-called quote-unquote little housing? What would they have to do that somewhere?
So there's, you know, as Councilman Fusco said, with any potential conditional use, we're kind of speculating here. We're going to look at for those 8 factors and look at the land use. I will say, you know, we've looked at this a little bit. There's, in our code, there's not really a fundamental difference between the tiny house, and I hesitate to use that term. I would say shack, because what's really being discussed is building a shack. The tiny houses aren't really houses. They're not hooked up to electrical or heat or those kind of things. They're building code, again, issues that dictate that. Again, that's not so much of a zoning issue. Yes, the campground use would be a zoning issue, but the suitability of that domicile for human habitation, that's more of a building and housing code issue. So I think, like all conditional uses, it's something we would look at on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you. Sorry about the phone.
Okay, can we,
can I say one more thing?
yeah,
Just one more thing. I think we have an opportunity here in the city of Akron to be a model for homelessness. I think, you know, we have a lot of smart people in the planning department, the zoning department, some really smart people around this horseshoe, and I think there's a lot of people out in our community that are very, very smart. So I would very strongly advocate that we work very hard to come up with a really good solution for this problem. And you know, I think, like I said, we could be a model for the whole country on this issue. And like a lot of people said, this problem's not going to go away. It's probably going to increase. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Kilby. Anyone else? Mr. Milkovich. Mr. Milkovich.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the words of Mr. Lewis, he did not invent these people. Whether the community wants to address the concerns of these people, they will continue to exist. And we, as a body, as a community, and as human beings, will have failed in our duties as God's children to help them. Mr. Lewis has successfully addressed many issues faced by these people. Where other organizations have failed, we all can agree that a tent is not a long-term solution, but it has been a short-term solution. And it's been a solution that Mr. Lewis has forged when others turned their backs, and has been successful in sparking a conversation about humility, humanity, and civic responsibility. And this should not be the end of the conversation, but the beginning. And as my good friend Mr. Kilby has said, we live in a great community here in Akron, and there are a lot of good folks out there who are willing to help with their resources. I had met with a gentleman that has reached out to Mr. Kilby, Mr. David Murray, who is willing to take upon this task about finding a solution to the problem with transitional housing. And we've been working together. There's a few locations in my ward, Ward 10, where this tent city has been. And is it a permanent fix? Maybe not. I don't want to call them shacks. I've been down there in the valley, and I actually witnessed the building of this structure. It is well insulated. It's a lot better than a tent. It's mobile, can be moved. These folks, as my friend and colleague, Ms. Sample said, they were moved away, a lot of them from the Freedom Trail. Freedom Trail. We put a name on it as the Freedom Trail while we pushed those residents of Akron, and yes, they are residents of Akron. It's my time here on council as we have given sweetheart deals to millionaires and multimillionaires.
Mr. Milkovich, please stick to the issue at hand.
I'm sticking to the issue at hand. Why we don't look and help those at most need, the poor. That's the reason why I got into politics, was to help those who needed the most help. The rich don't need help, the poor need help. Please consider that when it's time to vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Very good. Hearing none. Again, we will invite those that were here back this evening at 7 o'clock. We'll have an additional public hearing. Thank you. Now we'll move on to the balance of the agenda. Short of any questions or concerns, we'll take time on that and move into the new list of legislation. Item number 4, we just conducted a public hearing on. Item number 5 is authorizing conditional use to establish a medical marijuana dispensary at 46 South Main Street, South Summit Street.
We would refer and advertise this for next week, public hearing.
Thank you. 6, ratifying the mayor's application to the Summit County Land Utilization Corporation seeking grant funds for the demolition of the rubber bowl. Anybody here on this?
Mr. Becker.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, this is an ordinance to be able to receive funding from the land bank in order to do the demolition for the rubber bowl.
Okay, so this is just a grant application?
Yes, it's actually to accept the grant funds from the land bank.
To actually accept the grant funds?
Yes.
Well, that's easy. Questions or comments? Suspend the rules, okay?
Yes, please.
I assume so. Is there a recommendation for suspension of the rules? Is there a question? Okay. Veronica? Or Ms. Sims, I should say.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The grant amount is for $50,000. Is that correct?
I believe it's 100,000 from the land bank. Is it 50? It's 50,000, I'm sorry.
50,000, so where's the other money coming from?
We got 100,000 from the state of Ohio. And 50,000 from capital.
So the total cost is 200,000?
Yes. Correct.
Thank you.
Further questions or comments? Is there a recommendation for suspension of the rules?
So moved.
Is there a second? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. 7, authorizing the mayor or his designee to file an application with assurances and certifications with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development for the Continuum of Care application for Stuart B. McKinney funds for the homeless. Helen Tomek, are you the designee?
No.
Okay.
I'm the messenger. Good afternoon, committee chair, committee members. The Continuum of Care will be submitting the Continuum of Care application to the Department of Housing and Urban Development on or about September 17th in the amount of approximately $5 million. City funds will not be used on any of these projects. The Continuum of Care is a community-wide effort that provides comprehensive homeless services to individuals and families. The COC assists communities in planning for and providing a balance of emergency shelters, rapid rehousing, transitional and permanent supportive housing initiatives, as well as supportive services as needed by the homeless person so they can transition from the streets to housing, jobs, and independent living. The COC application, as indicated, is consisting of 31 projects from 13 different organizations looking at providing permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing dollars. The target population includes single parents, single men, single women, youths that have aged out of the foster care system, and mentally ill and disabled populations. Thank you very much. I do have representatives here to talk about the grant application if you have questions as well.
Please come forward if you'd like, and if you could provide for the committee your name and organization.
Yes, my name is Joe Scalise. I'm Director of Housing Services at United Way of Summit County and a Continuum of Care board member. Here to talk about the application.
Very good, thank you.
Questions or comments?
I don't believe so. There's a number of organizations here, excuse me, that is going to be recipients of this funding, I assume. That's what this is.
Correct.
Chart is. And it also indicates how many, where it says project description, it says participants. I assume that's the number of individuals.
Beds and/or apartments. So there's approximately 415 beds that will be funded through this in 2019.
And again, the eligibility for all those beds being someone that is in Category 1 homeless, either living on the streets in a place unfit for habitable condition or staying in the shelter.
Okay, very good. And also, I'm sorry.
I just have a question.
Oh, okay. Can I finish first?
Oh, sure, I'm sorry.
Thank you. The, so what we see here, though, is that, just curious why the difference is. I assume it's the project name. For example, Community Health Center, there's a number of different, project name, I assume that's different locations where this is located?
So over the past 20 years, agencies submitted for and received funding. For an example, they received funding for Peachtree 1.
Right.
And then a couple years later, that was a successful project, and they decided to apply for another grant application, so thus you have Peachtree 2. So over the years, it's transpired to 31 different projects.
Okay, okay. Now, let me ask this, and that is that Continuum of Care is basically a county-wide organization, is that correct?
Correct. It's both the flow of funds from the Housing and Urban Development, Continuum of Care funds designated for people that are Category 1 homeless for the development of housing programs. In our community, it's also a collaboration between all the agencies that serve homelessness to help build a system that both flows and effectively gets people out of a sheltered or an unsheltered situation as quickly as possible and into their own housing.
Gotcha.
So there's a fund level and a system level.
I see here, though, that basically it says scattered sites, Cuyahoga Falls, Akron, Ohio.
So, go ahead.
So, yeah, you probably know where I'm going.
So some of the units are shelter-based, so they're a fixed building in perhaps Cuyahoga Falls, Akron, or somewhere in the county. The rapid rehousing programs and some of the other programs are vouchers, whereas a homeless individual may be awarded a voucher and they can seek housing, apartments throughout Akron and Summit County. So that's why we talked about scattered site Summit County. So in that instance, there may be 90 vouchers out there, like a Section 8 voucher, and so the individual has the freedom of choice as to where they would like to have that housing. Is it located in Akron?
Is it possible to find out what it is, breakdown per city? Is that possible to find out?
We can approach AMHA and ask them for a printout, and all the agencies that have scattered site, we can ask them for a printout as to where those
Just curious.
vouchers are currently located.
Just
Yes.
curious. Thank you. Ms. Mobian, you have questions?
I think I found the answer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Other questions or comments? I think it would be appropriate. I'd like to request a week's time so
That's fine, consent.
council can
okay.
study this and we can get that answer.
Yep.
Is there a motion to refer this item? Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. The ayes have it.
I
Thank you.
need to abstain.
Oh, with one abstention, Mr. Clerk, if you noted.
Who?
Would you, Ms. Mobian abstain?
Okay.
Is there any other questions or comments? Okay. Very good. Well, with that, I believe we're adjourned. Thank you.
We really wouldn't have anything now just because with the Great Streets program, we're kind of targeting those funds for the facade grants and things like the Great Streets area. So there wouldn't be any of that location. I mean, they could probably talk to like the small business association or like even the development finance authority. Sometimes they do low interest loans and things like that. Yeah, anything we could do to make it look better would be, yeah. That's good, that's positive. You'd be amazed how much I'm not aware of. Oh, on how? Yeah.
Can we please get the service committee together here? Anybody on the service committee, please?
Yeah, I'm not Rich Swirsky.
schedule, right there.
All right.
I'd like to call the Public Service Committee to order. It looks like we have all members present. I would like a motion of approval of the minutes from our last meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing and seeing none, the minutes pass. We have one item before us. It's an ordinance authorizing the purchasing agent or her designee without the formality of publicly advertising for bids to enter into a contract with Greco LLC for the rental of a chiller for the ice rink in Lot 3 and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. This is for the ice rink events for our yearly rental of the chiller to put on the ice rink. So this was for 2017, 2018.
Is this will be the same price as last year?
Actually, it's a little bit different because we used to rent the rink, the chiller, set up and tear down. It was one price.
Okay.
And we actually purchased the rink last year, so we rented the equipment last year, just the chiller portion. It was about $109,000 in the year before. So we purchased the rink for $58,000, I believe, rented the chiller. Now what we did, with AES, our Akron Energy people, and our own staff, we've taken the chiller, refurbished it, and this year coming up, we will not rent this chiller, we will use our own.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yes.
Oh, great. And that's another plug for our system that we have that's running in the black and doing very well. So.
Yes.
And in fact, I believe they're having an ice cream social here coming up too to celebrate their new chilling system. So it all kind of goes hand in hand. That's good. I'm glad that I actually asked you so you were able to pull in that piece.
Yes.
Because we have the opportunity to go visit, but when it comes through that we really see the impact that it has on us and the investment that we made, and how some of it was, we were in the forest for a while, but we're out now, so that's so good to hear.
They're really partnering with us.
Yeah, and that's terrific, because we had gone through another person who had run for us that wasn't quite as dependable and didn't get the results that we're getting right now. So
Yes.
I think that's another asset. Are there any questions or concerns about this piece of legislation? Any from any of council that are in the chambers right now? Hearing and seeing none, what is the
Consent's fine.
pleasure? Pardon?
Consent's fine.
Consent? There's a motion for consent from Councilman Kamer. Is there a second? I have a second from Councilman Hoke. All in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed? Hearing and seeing none, this will pass. Is there anything else to come before the Service Department, Service Committee? Since there is none, this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Safety, yeah.
right, I'm going to go ahead and move forward because we are running behind. I'm going to call a public safety meeting to order. The last time we held a meeting was back in July. Can I get approval of those minutes, please? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. And then everybody on the committee is present. We do have 3 new pieces in front of us today, and our first piece is authorizing the purchasing agent or her designee to enter into a contract or contracts without publicly advertising for bids with Key Tracer Systems Incorporated for the purchase of a key tracer system and locker and declare emergency. And we have Deputy Mayor of Public Safety Charlie Brown with us and Captain Shanae. And I'll let you introduce, I believe it's Carol. Yes, I'll let you introduce her and her title.
Sure.
Thanks.
Thank you. I'll make one introduction of everyone. You got Shanae and you got Carol. And behind me is the District Chief Kaup. He'll be coming up as well. As it relates to Key Tracer and locker system, Cap, go ahead.
This is a system that will allow us to keep better track of our pool vehicles, and we're also looking at establishing a small fleet of 4 to 6 cars that are going to be designated as extra job use only. That would also be a way to track the use of those and help with the billing that happens then for our extra job customers who want to have a cruiser for the job. A prime example would be the construction companies where they have a cruiser out on the highway. It also has a component that are 2 lockers that we would use to store extra radios that get checked out by our reserve officers who are not assigned a permanent radio, but if they work an extra job, they can come down and sign one out. This would also create a better tracking feature for keeping track of those radios.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from committee members, please? Councilwoman Sims.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How exactly does the system work?
So the locker system has 32 lockers. It's 2 16-compartment locker sets, so a total of 32. And we're also purchasing the system with RFID tags that can be applied to each radio so that you can tell remotely whether or not the item is in the locker. So the system administrator can access 24 hours a day, 7 days a week through the internet login and see where these assets, if they're in or out, and can also, in an emergency, case of an emergency, can also override the system and, unlock it and let a key come out for a vehicle or to open the locker doors. The key system itself has most likely, I'm not sure exactly how we're configuring it because it has the ability to do fingerprint, facial recognition, or like our swipe cards that we use to get in and out of the building. I believe that's the route that we're going to go with it, where an officer can make a reservation to use a car. That car then can only be, the key can only be removed by that officer after the officer swipes his card, and he's able to take that key out, and it tracks and can do reports to show usage and who used it and when, and if it was returned on time, and that sort of thing.
So we'll be collecting the data to that end. So the same system that tracks radios also checks vehicles?
Yes, it's lockers versus the like key compartments where the key tabs fit in there and they can only come out with the swipe of the card.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Good question. Councilwoman Keith, please.
Thank you. Captain Schneck, can you tell me, is this a one-time cost or is there a yearly annual fee that will, for the upkeep? And if things are implemented that make the system larger capacity, whatever, do we have to buy a whole new system or will this be able to be adapted as it is?
One of the reasons why we went with this system is because there is no annual fee and it has the capability of growing with minimal cost. It's just adding on and purchasing an additional. With the key system, we could add on an additional 32 key system component to have a total of 64 keys. If we decide to go further with this, and if it's working well, it's easy to add on to the system. And there is no annual fee, and there's an unlimited number of users, so there's no license restriction as far as number of users.
Good. Thank you, Councilwoman. Good question. Any other council members, committee? Councilwoman Movian, did you have your hand up? Please.
Could you explain how this will trace? You said something about the radio?
The radio, the RFID tags, if you put on the radio, allows an administrator to remotely tell if the radio is in the locker. And what that prevents is somebody from, signing it in, but actually keeping the radio. And then later on they could say, well, I signed it in. It shows where I signed it in. But that doesn't guarantee that the item actually went into the locker. With the RFID tag, you can tell that it is in there.
Does this have anything to do with the video, the camera?
No, this would be the mobile radios for communication.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman, another question?
So just a follow-up to that question. Currently, someone monitors that. There's physically somebody there monitoring the radios.
Right now, somebody would, they come and sign a clipboard, and depending on when the job worked, it might not be the same people that are working
Could be shift change.
Right.
Yeah. So we'll just gradually wean that person off while the system comes up.
Well, that's not their full-time job or anything. It's just the location for it is at the information desk where there is somebody there all the time.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Any other questions or comments? Some good questions. Do you have a, no? Oh, okay. I'll wave to you.
Mr. King, I have one other point of interest
Sure.
with the system. The quote is in Canadian currency, so the $36,625 is actually going to be close to $10,000 less after it's translated into American currency. But because the exchange rate can fluctuate on a daily basis, we put it in for the amount on the quote because it will not be over that amount, where if the exchange rate changed and we had done the translation at a time where it would leave us short, we didn't want that to happen. So just wanted to let you know that it's actually going to be less than what's the amount on there.
Oh, no, thank you for telling us that. With that, what is the pleasure? What are you looking at? Consent agendas?
Consent's fine, sir.
All right.
Motion for consent.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. All right, we'll put that on the consent agenda. Thank you. Appreciate it. All right, our next piece. Ordinance authorizing the mayor or his designee to apply for and accept, if awarded, the 2008 Judicial Assistance Grant administered through the United States Department of Justice, Bureau of Justice Assistance, designed to provide law enforcement agencies with the flexibility to prioritize and utilize justice funds where they are needed most and declare an emergency. Charlie?
Sure, Carol's going to talk about this.
All right. Carol?
Hi there. Carol McCullough, Law Enforcement Planner for APD. The Justice Assistance Grant is one that's awarded to jurisdictions based on crime data. So it's an allocation that we get. We get it every year. This year, we have been told that the allocation overall is $129,113. It's $129,113. Of that, City of Akron is taking 84% of the award, or $108,455. The balance of $20,658 is going to the County of Summit for their law enforcement purposes. It's one of the I guess, best grants for law enforcement from the perspective that it's very versatile. You're able to apply, give them a budget of what you anticipate getting, and should your needs change, you're able to do a grant amendment fairly easily, and that allows us to be right up on whatever the needs are at that moment. It's a 3-year award. We can use it over the course of 3 years. Currently, what is in the budget that we submitted is training equipment, body-worn cameras and accessories, overtime, data extraction equipment and software for use with cell phones and computers, and a training budget, because we are in the position of being told by the Ohio Peace Officer Training Academy, OPATA, who normally provides funds to law enforcement for training, that we are not to expect any in 2019. So we have to make plans for that. Anybody have any questions?
Thanks, Carol. We got Councilwoman Keith. She's got a question.
Thank you, Councilman Kamer. Can you tell me what we're losing from OPATA this year with not having them sustain the training as they have in the past?
I didn't hear the first part of the question.
You said that Ohio OPATA, will not be funding any training this year. What loss is that to us monetarily?
I have to admit that I don't know the exact dollar figure. You?
I think Sergeant Wood just walked through. He may have a number for that, but if not, we will reach out to you and let you know exactly what it is.
Okay. Is he coming? Well, there he is.
The sergeant says about $100,000.
Whoa. Well, then almost this whole grant could be used just for training.
That is true. Normally, the way that it works, just so that we're clear, OPATA can make training mandatory or not. Okay. And so the training is not mandatory in 2019. That being said, it's still good for us to have at least a modicum of this training.
Okay. And the other question that I had was, with your priorities, I know that you said overtime. When you put in overtime, do you stipulate how that overtime will be used? And for what categories that'll be used for?
Yes, we do, ma'am. It'll be used for hotspot things, like in the past, I know. Police has used it for Mayday around the University of Akron. If we have any spikes in crime, we may use it for that. So it's pretty flexible as to how we can use that overtime.
Okay, but you've listed in what you have sent in on the grant where you believe it'll be used, but you can change that, as I heard you say, over the 3 years, according to what situations we have that have come upon us that we didn't expect. Is that true?
That's correct. We listed it generically as hotspot overtime.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Any other questions? Councilwoman Sims, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just assumed that body-worn cameras would be purchased out of some of the funds that we received as a part of recent passage of the levy. Have we historically purchased, like last year, body-worn cameras out of this fund?
From this particular fund, no. We did coordinate so that we were looking at what funding was going to come out of issue 4 next year, so that it wouldn't be duplicative, and each fund is taking up a portion of our needs based on that, if that makes sense.
Kind of, sort of. So what's the number of cameras?
It is 30 cameras and 10 evidence transfer management stations. That's where they put the body-worn camera in, and it uploads the information to evidence management, where we keep all of the video. So we're getting 10 of the stations for that and 30 of the body-worn cameras. It's to be used both for new hires, as we anticipate increasing the force, as well as people sign out body-worn cameras for different things, different operations.
So the coordination, the total is 30, or is that just the...
30 is how many we are requesting in this grant.
Through the JAG grant. What's the cost?
It's $15,000 for 30 body-worn cameras, so $500 a piece, and $15,000 for the evidence transfer management stations. So those are about $1,500 a piece.
So the total is about
$30,000 for the two, for body-worn cameras and the evidence transfer management stations.
sorry, do a quick math. What's the percentage of that budget is that purchase? Is that the only equipment?
There is training equipment, which is primarily targets for firearm training. There's other equipment that's related to computer forensics. So that was the information that, like data extraction equipment is also in the budget.
So what would you say about 60% of the budget is on equipment?
That's difficult for me to say off the top of my head. Let me see real quick.
I tried to do the math in my head.
Let's do this. Let's, Carol, can you just get that figure for her, and we'll get it back to you.
I'd be
The
happy to.
guesstimation will do me just fine. So technically, are we spending 60% of the budget, JAG budget, on equipment? That's all.
I don't think it's 60 because overtime is over $17,000. Training is over $40,000. So that's 57 right there out of a $108 budget, $108,000 budget.
So as you get that information, Mr. Brown, just seeing the breakdown would be helpful. So whatever the breakdown is for salaries, whatever the breakdown is for equipment would be fine. Thank you.
Yeah, provide that for everybody, if possible. Any other questions or comments? Pleasure on this? Is consent okay?
Consent okay.
Okay.
Motion for consent?
Thank you. I got a motion. Second, all in favor? Aye. Nobody opposed? Okay. So we'll put that on the consent agenda. Thank you. I appreciate it. All right, one more piece in front of us today. Ordinance authorizing the mayor or his designee to accept an assistance to firefighters grant from the Department of Homeland Security and the Federal Emergency Management Agency that was awarded to the City of Akron Department of Public Safety Fire Division, authorizing the mayor or his designee to enter in agreements to purchase the equipment requested with the grant and declare an emergency. Charlie?
Chief Cow.
Chief. Good afternoon. Thank you. Yeah, earlier this year, we applied for a grant, submitted a grant through the Department of Homeland Security, more specifically the Assistance to Firefighter Grant. With that, we requested funding to purchase 3 different types of equipment. The first being 8 power cots and power loaders. These are to be installed in our medical units. This provides lifting assistance to get patients in and out of the med units. That, of course, that exposure to that physical activity really exposes our personnel to a great deal of injuries and potentially career-ending injuries. So this will provide a great deal of safety for our personnel on EMS units. And with that, we currently have 2 systems. We're getting a med unit in this year with the system in it, and then these 8 will give us 11 units. And we'll have 2 remaining that at some point we'll fund through another grant potentially. So we'll have all of our units with power cot and loader systems. Oh, wow. Another piece of equipment that we asked for 13 automated external defibrillators. We asked for 13 as we have 13 frontline fire engines. Due to the increase in call volume for our med units every year, we use our fire engines more frequently as first responders if many of our med units are out. So there are many times that a fire engine will be the first unit on scene to a medical emergency. We do carry medical equipment on all of our rigs, but we don't have electrical therapy in cardiac arrest situations, which could be the difference to survival for that patient. So this will allow us to put an automated external defibrillator on each of our fire engines in the case of a cardiac arrest where electrical therapy is the difference between life and death. The third piece of equipment that we requested, these are personal rope rescue systems. What they are, of course, rope systems in a bag that we currently have now, but they are outdated. NFPA has a standard of once rope is beyond 10 years of age, it's to be taken out of service, and we're there with our rope rescue systems. What these are, it will provide firefighters with a tool to be able to bail out of a dangerous situation on upper floor windows. If the fire gets too hot, life-threatening situation, this rope, we currently have ladder belts that they can attach to, and they can go out the windows and descend down to safety. So those are the 3 different types of equipment that we requested, were awarded, and we are asking to accept this grant.
Thank you, Chief. I appreciate it. Thanks for explaining that. Any questions from committee members, please? Councilwoman, please.
This is just a request, maybe to you, Mr. Chairman. In the future, I appreciate the breakdown because that makes it much clearer than just seeing an amount. So here on it says funds to be determined. Is that just because the grant hadn't been accepted, or just on the
UCCR?
On the financial data portion of it?
Oh,
it just says.
That's the actual fund that it'll be coming from. It's to be determined. Typically, finance will create, I think, a grant of this magnitude. They'll create a new fund number.
It's just because we don't have the.
That way they can track everything in and out individually. So I don't have that number yet, no.
Okay. Thank you, but still the same request, if we could get kind of like a breakdown that as a part of the supportive document would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Do you understand her concerns or questions?
A breakdown of the equipment that we requested?
So when we get the request, or when we get the ordinance, the legislation, it just has an amount. You kind of articulated what exactly you guys were purchasing with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I can, in the future, provide you with a breakdown.
That would just be helpful to see it. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Kramer, I will make sure, to the Councilwoman's point, that there's a breakdown for all the UCCRs from moving forward, so you guys will be able to see that.
Okay, moving forward, you'll make sure? Okay, gotcha. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Councilwoman, please.
This is a sizable grant that we are receiving. I believe that, I could be wrong, but I believe that compliments and kudos should be going to Melinda, who is sitting right behind Deputy Chief Charles Brown, for her work on this grant. Would that be correct? Or did you write the grant? Did you do it?
I wrote the grant.
Well, then kudos to you.
Kudos, but absolutely.
I mean, look at the amount. Are we
Melinda
looking at the
Samsel.
amount
Absolutely.
of this?
She's been very instrumental in working with us and guiding us, and with a lot of great advice and helping in all of our grant applications.
You know what? I just believe when I look at this amount that somebody should be getting a compliment, because this is huge. And when I hear what you're using it for, it sounds like it sounds like things that we've been shortchanged that we haven't been able to give. These aren't frills. These are necessities. So a second kudos to you for realizing, and of course you would because that's your job, for realizing the need and where to put this money. So I want to thank you, and also Melinda, I want to thank you too for helping him, okay? All righty.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Any other questions? Councilwoman Sims.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know the lift for the emergency vehicles, we talked about that before. I was under the impression, actually, that that was some of the funding that was going to be used from the levies. So how does that, how do we that offset? How does that offset occur? Does that get recycled and used for something else, or how are we doing that?
The issue 4 funding, although it's relatively new, it looks like we get some money from issue 4 for equipment that we feel that we need, that's a priority each year. The power cots we felt are a necessity, and it's something that we wanted to get in the future. And so by getting this grant, we won't have to use those issue 4 funds to purchase cots, and that will free up that money for us to purchase other necessary equipment, safety equipment for the fire department. So that's the benefit of that. Yes, if we would not have received this grant, more than likely we would have used issue 4 funding to purchase some of this equipment, but it wouldn't have come close to covering all of this equipment. But by getting this, it does allow us to have some other options with that issue 4 funding.
Thank you.
Thank you. With that, any other questions, comments? All right, what's the pleasure?
Suspension of rules, please.
Suspension of the rules. All in favor? Aye. Anybody opposed? Okay, and just remember I know Rich had to step out. Okay. So I don't know if you have to do anything because of that vote, so. All right, we'll suspend the rules and present that this evening. With that,
thank you.
We're adjourned. Thank you.
Okay, next we have Parks and Recreation.
Yep.
Good afternoon. I'd like to call Park and Recreation Committee meeting to order. If I could please get approval of our last meeting minutes, which would have been on July 30th. If there aren't any questions, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so motion carries. Okay, so today we have one piece before us. It's an ordinance authorizing the My Neighborhood Our Akron City Council Grant Agreement Program, through which the neighborhood-based organizations in each ward in the city are eligible for small grants in a total amount not to exceed $4,000 per ward, authorizing the Director of the Department of Neighborhood Assistance to enter into grant agreements with neighborhood-based organizations to carry out the purpose of the program and declaring an emergency. With us today we have Mr. Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Parks Committee. This ordinance would reauthorize the My Neighborhood Our Akron City Council Grant Agreement Program. So far in 2018, we have 7 completed applications that are in the law department, and we have 3 additional that we're waiting on paperwork for a total of 10, but we need to approve this legislation before we can go ahead and fund any of these 7 grants.
Thank you, Mr. Valley. Are there any questions from members of the committee? Ms. Samples?
Thank you. John, a question. The 7 that have already been completed, I know we're reducing the grant per ward. Do we know what wards these ones have been awarded for? My concern is if we're going down to $4,000 per ward, if we have 10 already approved, what if one of our wards have went over the exceeded amount?
I will get you that information. I'm not quite sure where the 7 completed applications are, but I'll get a breakdown before this evening. I don't think there's any ward that's close to exceeding the 4,000.
Okay. Thank you.
To that point, Mr. Valley, my concern is this, because I remember we had great discussion on this since we cut it from 10,000 per ward down to 4,000, but when we cut it, it was my understanding, and if we've done something else and it just wasn't brought to council's attention, then that's good. But I remember we had cut it to $40,000. We had much discussion, and then we had cut it to 30,000 because we took 10,000 and shifted it to the water, and then we cut it to 20,000 because we took 10 and we used it for a reading program. So if this is for 40 and we're not talking about taking the water out of this, the reading program is over. If this is for 40.
This is for $4,000 per ward.
Okay. Okay. So with the request from Councilwoman Samples, if we can get an understanding on where that is, because I do believe we're going to have to come up with some way of approving things if a ward goes over. I hope we use this full 40,000. In the past, I know we've been challenged, but I know I've put it out. I know other council persons have been out there promoting it to folks, so I'm hoping that we get these in. If we could just get an idea of, where we are with those, and if we can get a confirmation, since we had much discussion on the other, what happened with the other dollars, how those programs were funded, we can pass this today for the 40, and if we need more, we'll do more research.
I would suggest consent agenda, and I'll provide the information a little bit later this afternoon.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions from members of the committee?
So this is just my second, third, fourth lightweight appeal that somehow at-large members figure out a way to allow us to participate. I do think a little bit that the reading program, we kind of did that a little bit, but I just think there's opportunities for projects that benefit the city overall that run across the wards, and just having an opportunity to have some resources to be able to support those would be grand.
I can't speak for the other 10 members of council, but I would, we would entertain any suggestions that council at large has for grants that follow the criteria and they're eligible.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, to Ms. Sims' point, I would like to share, because a lot of folks I work with come out of the Buchtel cluster. Buchtel covers wards 3, 4, and some of 1. So it may not, you can do, I would encourage at-large members to do programs with any group within that ward. I hope we get to the point where council members actually have a budget. Some of our colleagues in cities referable to our size, but at this point right now, the dollars are reserved for the ward. And if you have an organization in that area, you can, at large, have the advantage of being able to do projects throughout the city, where most of us are regulated to our wards. Because of Buchtel, I work with groups that do projects in 3, 4, and 1. So I would just, but I think we can and we should look at how we can meet your request. With that being said, if there aren't any other questions or concerns, I have a motion for consent. Can I get a second? Second. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Thank you. If there is anything else to come before us, I will say this. If you look at our last meeting minutes, we know that there is a survey taking place throughout the city for residents, where they go to akron.gov/survey, all dealing with the park and recreations. There are some future conversations I think we need to have on council, using this as a reference, and I have had a conversation with Mr. Hardy. He'll be prepared to follow up with what he shared with us on July 30th next week regarding Lock 3. So please encourage your residents to take advantage of that park and recreation survey, and we will have discussion here on council. With that, we can consider ourselves adjourned. Thank you.
Public utilities starting in 1 minute.
That's what I was going to say.
30 seconds. Everybody here. Kilby. Right. Where's Bruce? Oh, where's Bruce?
Bruce is on screen.
Yeah, I don't know where he went. I'm not sure where Mr. Kilby went to.
He's not sure. Mr. Keith, could you see if Mr. Kilby's back there?
I'm trying to get us caught up on time, so you just move right in.
Yeah. Well, we gotta give a minute or two. Tony's he's like Mr. Efficiency corporate.
Right.
I think he also enjoys it. He just does that over there. He doesn't think he likes it. I mean, he doesn't think he likes it. He sees me over there. Wait a second. Wait a second. I'll be there.
Okay, all members are present. Can we get approval for the previous meeting minutes from the Public Utilities meeting?
Motion for approval.
Can I get a second? All in favor? I still didn't. All in favor?
Aye.
I'm tripping. You guys have to start responding, and it's sort of kind of like y'all aren't paying attention. It's kind of irritating, just saying. We have two pieces before us. Ordinance authorizing Director of Public Service to enter into a contract after publicly advertising for bids for temporary concrete installation over excavations of the Division of Water Distribution and Sewer Maintenance prior to final pavement, surface repairs by the Division of Highway Maintenance, approving specifications therefore and declaring an emergency. Mr. Lettle?
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. This is our annual legislation to put this out to bid for the temporary excavation, or temporary repairs of excavation, and permanent repairs also.
Okay. Any questions from committee members? Council? What's your pleasure?
Consent's fine.
The motion for consent?
Motion for consent.
All in favor? Okay, our second piece, ordinance ratifying the actions of Director of Public Service in contracting with H.M. Miller Construction Company, Corin, Maine, and Thompson Pipe Products for the emergency repair of a 48-inch water main in Reservoir Park on Britton Road and declaring an emergency. Mr. Lettle?
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. This was an emergency repair we had to make to our transmission main that feeds our water tank there at Reservoir Park.
Okay. Any questions from committee members? You got any questions, Mr. Kilby?
This pipe. Yeah.
Here.
Yeah, can you give us a second to read it over a little bit? So, we were trying to get this Councilman Swirsky's computer to work, so I wasn't really paying attention when you explained that. Would you do it one more time, Mr. Lettle, please?
Well, from our water storage tank there at Reservoir Park, right outside, there was a break on the 48-inch transmission main that comes all the way from the plant.
Okay.
So it was an emergency repair.
Okay. All right, so how big of a break was it?
Well, we had to replace 20 feet of the 48-inch pipe.
Okay, so was this the original pipe?
Actually, it was not. It was
Okay.
it was a piece of pre-stressed concrete cylinder pipe.
Okay.
We replaced with a piece of ductile iron pipe
Okay.
to save about $12,000 over the concrete pipe.
Okay, very good. That's it.
Okay. Any questions from council? What's your pleasure?
Consent's fine.
Okay, motion for consent? Wait, did I get a motion? Okay, and second for Mr. Kilby. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. If we have nothing else coming before us, we are adjourned.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
next.
All right, I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee. Have a motion to accept the minutes from the last meeting.
Second.
Motion is second. All in favor? All right, thank you. We have one new item to come before us. This is an ordinance authorizing the mayor to accept grant funding from Summit County, Ohio through 2019, 31st Annual Akron Summit Holocaust Commemoration Grant Agreement for use toward the managing artist's consultant salary, the purchase of awards, food, and other items associated with the program, and declaring an emergency. Mr. Hardy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For those who know and don't know, last year the City of Akron Holocaust Commemoration Program celebrated 30 years of this ongoing program that incorporates a teaching and understanding of the Holocaust in not only Akron Public Schools, but all schools across Summit County, in the engagement with the young artists, both written, verbal, illustrative, any form of art you can think of. Students have an opportunity to take what they've learned, submit, and be awarded accordingly. And given the length of the program, we did not want to lose it in the community. However, funding is always a concern. And given the constraints on the city, staffing and financial and otherwise, we have partnered with Summit County to now have the Akron Summit County Holocaust Commemoration Program. So essentially, the legislation before you allows us to not only accept the grant, $5,000 from Summit County, which pays roughly half of the cost of the program, but also authorizing the city to serve as fiscal agent for the program, as we have the last 30 years, and continue to run the program.
Questions or comments? Mr. Swirsky.
Well, just that it's maybe by coincidence, but it's fitting that today, first day of Rosh Hashanah, that we hope we pass this.
Great, and that was going to be my request as well, that we could pass this by emergency because of the day.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Swirsky. Questions or comments? Do I have a motion for pass this as an emergency measure, suspend the rules?
Second.
Motion is second. All in favor, let it be known by saying aye. Aye. Thank you. We'll pass that out this evening. Secondly, we have an ordinance approving the recommendations of certain tax incentive review councils regarding the continuation, modification, and/or cancellation of tax increment financing agreements in the City of Akron and declaring an emergency. Oh,
Mr. Bufford's going to
I'm
present
sorry, I
this.
saw Steve sitting there. Please.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, each year we present legislation to City Council to approve the Tax Incentive Review's council recommendations. This year, the Tax Incentive Review Council met and voted to continue the tax increment financing agreements in all 4 school districts.
Excellent. Questions or comments? Would consent agenda be okay?
Yes, please.
We have a motion for consent.
Second.
Motion and second. All in favor, let it be known by saying aye. Aye. Thank you. We'll put that on the consent agenda. Thank you very much. And then finally, we have an ordinance authorizing the issuance of a bond of the city in a principal amount not to exceed $10 million for the sale to the Water Pollution Control Loan Fund of the State of Ohio to finance the cost of improvements to the city's wastewater system, pledging certain revenues from the city's wastewater system on a subordinated basis to secure the payment of the principal and of the interest on the bond, and authorizing the execution and delivery of the bond, the trust agreement, and other documents, and the taking of other actions related to the issuance and sale of the bond, and declaring an emergency. Mr. Fricker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is another 45-year bond that we're issuing to fund some of our CSO sewer projects. This one is for the Euler Conveyance Project. which is Rack 27 and Rack 29. So our engineers have been going after this longer-term financing when available. So this is, I believe this is our second 45-year bond issuance, which means that it's much more affordable in terms of the debt service to repay those bonds than like a 20-year traditional loan would be.
Exactly, yeah, and that does defer some costs to a next generation.
Correct.
Which I just want to congratulate my grandchildren on the sewer system that they're going to be paying for next 45 years, but it does. I know we had looked at bonds even, I think we'd seen out of DC at one time, there were 100-year bonds being issued, but much better for, current taxpayers than a 20-year bond.
Right, and we're still getting pretty good rates even on these longer-term bonds.
Excellent. Questions or comments from the committee? Consent?
Yes, consent is fine.
Okay. We have a motion for consent and a second. Okay, a motion and a second. All in favor, let it be known by saying aye. Aye. All right, we'll carry that to this evening's agenda and put that on the consent agenda. Thank you so much. We have nothing else to come before us. We will consider ourselves adjourned. I like the way Russ said that. We'll consider ourselves.
Hallelujah.
Russ, did you see how your words flowed out of my mouth?